Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josephine Watson, and I'm the Commercial Projects Editor at IGB. I'll be moderating today's session, just doing the introduction and outro before handing over to Chris Smart. We're delighted to be hosting another IGB webinar today, sponsored by eMerchantPay, which will discuss the challenges of payment optimization. In this session, our speakers will discuss the various obstacles to growth they've had to overcome and share the knowledge they've gained along the way. They'll touch upon how payment systems and processes can be reconciled after a merger or acquisition takes place, and additionally, we'll discuss how the effective analysis of payments data can help inform strategies for expansion. eMerchantPay's SVP of Global Gambling, Chris Smart, will be our moderator, as I mentioned before, and we'll be joined by Paul Bolton, founder and CEO of Payment Strategy, as well as Isabel DeLille, head of Group Payments at Pinnacle. I'll let the panel introduce themselves more formally in a moment. For our audience, there'll be a Q&A section following the presentation, so please do submit questions via the GoToWebinar portal as we go along, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible in the allocated time. And with that, I'm going to pass over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, let me thank you for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by Isabel and Paul, who I've known for quite some time, and they both have vast experience and a wealth of knowledge in the gambling sector. Dealing with payment companies, so they should be able to give you some really nice insight. And to give you a little background about myself, my name is Chris Smart. I'm the SVP of the Business Development and Relationship Management Units here at eMerchantPay. I've been in the sector for 13 years now, providing payment solutions across all functions of the payment remit, meaning payment gateways, acquiring, fraud and risk management, and all hosts of alternative payment methods as well. And what's always kept me inspired throughout my career in payments, working with the gambling sector, is not just the inspiration given to me by the people and the company that I've represented, but also by the inspiration and challenges from my customers, which has been gambling operators. I've always found them to be one step ahead compared to many other verticals. They have a true understanding of the cost of acquisition and the importance of that consumer experience whilst on their site. So they understand that every little step of the way is vital to offering a good service for their consumers in a highly competitive marketplace. I came on board at eMerchantPay around 3.5 years ago with the opportunity to revamp the product offering and company values. In fact, we relaunched a new brand in 2018. We've now got a very comprehensive global payment solution, specifically for the gambling sector. And we go a little bit beyond that because we want to deliver a very high level of in-depth data and analytics and insight to help our customers grow efficiently and productively. Our payment efficiency program and a white paper we produced called the Performance Pulse are really good examples of this, where we provide that added level of detail. So why don't I hand over to my panelists to allow them to introduce themselves and tell you a bit more about their background and history before we dive into the topics. Isabel, over to you.
Hi, Chris. Thanks. I'm Isabel DeLille, Global Head of Payment Solutions for Pinnacle. I was calculating out, I've been in the payments gaming industry for 18 years now, and worked for three different sort of organizations as such, although two were a merger actually. And working for companies that cater to a global market and various regulatory bodies that we work under, and how we manage those areas and different clients and acquisitions in different countries across the globe. So it's fun. Paul?
Okay, thanks, Isabel. My name's Paul Bolton. I've also been in the payments and online gaming space for just over 13 years. I've represented both gaming merchants and payments companies. Largest merchants, one of the largest merchants in the world, and a couple of small merchants as well. And I've also worked as a gateway acquirer, APM provider. Earlier this year, I set up Payment Strategy, which is my own consulting business, hoping to share my expertise and experience with those gaming merchants, e-commerce merchants, payments companies that need it.
Great. Thank you for that, guys. And what I wanted to do this afternoon, by the way, everyone that's in attendance here, is I know that we're in a very, very strange time at the moment, ever since March, and working conditions have changed, and everyone's outlook has kind of changed a little bit. And you know, many of us here in London are certainly still locked up at home working away. So I just wanted this to be a little break from the norm for a little bit. And there's nothing too salesy about what's going to go on here today. It's more just an insightful conversation that I hope you guys sound interesting and insightful. And yes, there is a Q&A at the end, although please feel free to fire any questions over at any time, and myself and Isabel and Paul will be more than happy to help. So I thought one of the first topics we could just have a discussion on, which I find always interesting, is the difference between an agile brand new startup to that of a large established operator that may have been through a few acquisitions or joined forces with other operators to become a huge force. And the difference in how the operators from their payments team look at payments, and if there's any pros and cons between those two different sides of organizations. In other words, when you're a brand new startup, if you've got plenty of experience, I'm sure you can possibly learn from things that went well in the past, and also learn from things that didn't go well, and maybe plan to build out the entire payment ecosystem that you're going to have at your operation in a different way to that you sometimes inherit when you join a large operation, or when you go through an extended period of growth with both the size of your operation and the amount of volume or countries from which you're accepting deposits.
I'll go first then. I think there's pros and cons on both sides. I mean, you mentioned there, obviously, if someone were to step into a head of payments role in a large, well-established payments company, obviously if they've been trading for a long time, maybe not everything is exactly how you would want it to be, and there's a certain amount of rejigging things and reorganization maybe that you may want to make it a perfect fit for that individual. The opposite side of that coin is, in a startup, you don't have that issue. You can craft it exactly how you want it to look and feel and behave. The flip side of the whole thing is, if you're a small payments company, if you're a small gaming operator approaching a payments company, especially if you're a startup, newly licensed, not got much trading history, in the world as it stands today, during COVID-19 and regulatory issues, a lot of payments companies are becoming more and more wary of small startup gaming companies. So there is that small potential issue to market. Whereas the large established gaming companies that merge and that buy each other, those doors are much easier to open, to have that conversation and to get a contract and an agreement in place.
Yeah, the resources become a much harder thing, and also just the history. Almost everybody who asks you to do a contract says, well, what is your forecast? What is your this? Show us your last 6 months of volume so that we can do this. And with the startup, they haven't got that. So it also makes it harder for them from just a negotiation perspective. If you haven't got anything in your bucket to negotiate with, it's much harder to get competitive price points. But equally, from a PSP provider perspective, I can also understand what's your incentive to give somebody a competitive price point if you don't have some level of confidence that it's going to be worth your effort as well. So it does go both ways on that side. The other thing is obviously software, and whether or not you've got the software to be able to manage doing your own integrations, or whether you want to go with a provider that sort of does everything together. There's pros and cons to both. Being a small company with fewer resources, it makes a lot of sense to then just allow a company that specializes in cashiers or specializes in integrations to sort of manage that for you. But it does restrict you on what you as a company can choose to do, because then you are really at the discretion of the provider and the service provider that you choose to go with. So it's got its goods and bads.
Yeah, because that's an interesting one about for startups now, and certainly for startups where they're an experienced team that have done this before and been at a company where you can share lots of volume. I guess I'm specifically talking about acquiring here then for this topic. But is it better as a startup to build a very strong relationship with one provider, but then how do you still incentivize that secondary or your backup provider to give you a decent level of service? Or would it be better from the off to have 2 or 3 and allow them to earn the right to be primary, if you like, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? Because I've always tried to stay away from demanding anything from the customers, because ultimately the performance in what we provide and the level of service we provide, and ultimately the performance of the product, should determine the level of volume you're going to get ultimately. But it's a difficult one, isn't it, between keeping everybody happy and trying to get the maximum value out of a primary supplier, if you like.
Yeah, and it also has to do with, even from that point, it also has to do with depending on your marketing strategy and where you're going for and which markets you want to go for, you also have to be aligned with the provider, because you may find that you've got somebody who you're going to give all of your cashier software or your completely hosted system to, and their risk appetite may not be the same as yours. So that is something that has to come in line at the very beginning. And then sort of ticking in with mergers and acquisitions, those things can change through time. So choosing that partner who is going to go with you and has the same vision is super important.
So I was going to ask there about kind of influencing factors here, whether either you're evaluating the host of providers that you have, because I've spoken to some operators, the larger ones, and by the time if they actually listed every single provider they have, it becomes, double figures at least when you're looking at the alternates, the wallets, the acquirers, the gateways, the software providers, even if we put those in there, and it becomes an absolute minefield. And therefore, I think that sometimes adds to why efficiency or optimizing the performance of all of those to get them in sync becomes near on impossible. But when you're kind of rating or the influencing factors of the providers, what normally does it for you? Is it that relationship with you, that they understand the journey you're going on? Is it a technical ease of integration type thing? Is it the solution they're offering tying in with your consumer demand? And where do commercials sit in all of that? Or are they actually something that you play with after you know that this is the right partner and the product works for what you want it to do? Paul, how about you on that one?
I mean, pricing and commercials are always going to be crucial, but to be perfectly honest, they're one of the easiest things to get. You can get to a point where you've got, a large operator with multiple payment providers, and the pricing, you can get them all to match on the pricing, you can get them all to match on the product suite, you can get them all to match on integration and possibly technical support. So to me, it does come down to the value adds, which in my mind is the service and the relationship. It's, will they help you when you need help? Will they foresee a problem coming and head it off at the pass so it doesn't hit you? I've mentioned on panels like this before that most of the life of a head of payments in a gaming operator is firefighting. So the more bodies you can throw at a fire to fight it, the better, whether that's an internal department or having that reliance, having that, I don't want to say dependency, but the ability to rely on your payments provider, knowing that they will do everything they can and they will solve the problem. That's, priceless. That's you can't put a price on it.
Do you think in your experience that operators put enough resource into the payments team in general? Because I say that because you said most of the time we're fighting fires, therefore you're being reactive more than having the time to look at the blue sky. What could we do next? What would add to this? It's more a case of, hang on a minute, let me fix that. Da, da, da.
Okay, yes. I mean, in my history in the past, you've always had, your strategy mapped out, and you've always had your plan, and you know what you're doing day to day, and you go to work and you've got your executables and your deliverables. But there's always something, is the point I'm making. It's not that we're sitting around waiting for fires to happen, not waiting just to, slide down the pole and get in the fire engine. It's they just happen no matter what you're doing. The BAU doesn't really exist. You can have the best intentions and the best BAU plans in the world, but there's always something comes up. And sometimes it's something small, and if you split the payments team by, say, operational, day-to-day, the small firefighting stuff, and then you may have a commercial and a technical team as well. Some of the issues don't affect all three teams. Obviously, it obviously does, it does vary on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, there are certainly things that everyone has to get involved with and fix, and some things that you may not find out about until 24 hours after the event because someone else has already solved the problem.
So was that a yes or a no?
What was the question? Do we have enough resource in payments department?
Yeah. Do you think the operators and the two that I've known you in particular with, for instance, both of those, do you think at the time they both actually gave enough, not enough, too much resources towards payments? Or
payments is an ever-growing thing. So what might be enough today may not be enough tomorrow. So at various times, yes, definitely. but also at various times, unfortunately, possibly not, where the growth of the business had happened. And it's not just payments, the whole, you know what it's like when these businesses are constantly buying each other and constantly opening new markets. The USA opening happened pretty much overnight, which has an impact in these large businesses that want to look at the USA as a market. So yeah, the entire business then has to kind of catch up and reestablish, the headcount and the resource availability.
And I tell you something that probably we left out of that is what also goes hand in hand with payment resource then is, I guess, development resource.
Technical resource, yes.
Yeah.
But Chris, you and I were at sorry,
Isabel.
No, I was going to say, Chris and I were at a seminar in Malta, I don't know, about 5 years ago. And it was for general e-commerce. It wasn't a gaming seminar, it was a payment seminar. And I seem to remember a vast amount of conversation was had at that point about the payment element of every product and every industry that's online, that the cashier as such and everything that goes behind it was considered a byproduct, like a necessity, but it was never viewed. The general consensus of everybody there was that the company's focus, whichever vertical it is going to be on their product. It's going to be on what they're selling, whether it be a casino product, a sportsbook product, esports, anything along those lines, shoes. Their main primary focus from a corporate perspective is what their product is. And even though the payments and the cashier is a vital vein for that the heartbeat of what they do, and that was too many analogies, it doesn't factor in when they're talking about their product, because the people in the company are supposed to be focused on what they do. Payments has to be a part of it that they recognize as being super important, but you can have the greatest payments in the world. If you don't have a good product or a strong product, it's not going to work. You can have the best product in the world. If you don't have strong payments, it's not going to work. So
correct.
It's never going to be. Yeah. It's never going to be core business. No consumer ever wants to go to a gaming site to deposit, or to go to an e-commerce retail site just to pay for something without receiving the goods. It's all about the goods and the services. But at the same time, if a deposit journey doesn't work, that's probably a lost customer.
That's right. And I've been saying this for 10 years, and this is not, rocket science here. Everyone kind of knows it. But the cost of customer acquisition in gambling is so high that, if you've managed to get my attention so I come onto your site in the first place, whether that's through some great marketing campaign, word of mouth, or what have you, I then navigate my way around your site, enjoy what I see. I can find the bets I want or the games that I want. So I then take the effort to go ahead and register. If I then go and deposit, let's say through a very traditional payment method, and it fails, well, you're just not going to try again. That's pretty much your confidence gone at that point. But you are right, of course.
Such a saturated market, you've got so many competitors. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, and you can have the best checkout process in the world. If the game's not up to scratch, if there's no Flash Gordon game out there that's impressing everybody, then it kind of doesn't matter. And we did a performance pulse, which was a white paper where we canvassed around 500 e-commerce experts in payments. So not just across gambling, but a couple of the stats that I just pulled out here, and I'd love to get your opinion on them, because I think in gaming it's not this obvious. But it came out that 20% of businesses are only reviewing their performance around decline code analysis, payment page optimization, and the infrastructure agility on a 6-monthly basis. The rest are not even doing it that much. Yet, I think 73% admitted there was considerable room for improvement. So I guess that boils down to the resource thing again. Because someone will come and say, we're entering into Spain, so let's get all the local payment methods and regulation and licenses for Spain. Let's launch that. Oops, there's a problem with that provider over here, so we need to fix that. You don't actually get that time to sit back and go, okay, let's review what we have in place now, that consumer journey, the amount of drop-offs when they see the payment page or whatever else it might be, and let's see if we can optimize and tweak that. Because those little slight tweaks and increases alone could be significant. But I guess it comes back to that, I know you're not sat waiting for the fires to happen, but that balance between trying to keep up with the rest of the business. You know, if they decide that they're moving into the territory, you've got to get the consumer demands for that territory, get those in place, evaluate the suppliers, integrate them, launch them, inform your customers. But then your main businesses, is it possible that sometimes the eye's taken off the ball a little bit as far as optimizing what's there for the majority of the business? Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. As you say, that kind of element does come down to resource, because you've got, you know, the reviewing what we've already got, and you've got the adding the new bits, and the two don't necessarily go hand in hand, but they're always performed by the same people, arguably at the same time. So yeah, you know, I think in that context, you're never going to have enough resource, because nothing's ever going to be perfect. You know, the payment scenario is never perfect. It's always, you know, very, very good is the best you're going to get. But even then, you're always working around, you know, optimizing what you've got, even reviewing and analyzing what you've got. I mean, the first step is just looking at it before you make a decision about changing anything or tweaking anything. Just having the time to look at, you know, say 20 or 30 cashiers in 20 or 30 countries for 20 or 30 brands, depending on the size of the business. It's a huge undertaking in itself.
I'll tell you what, I'm just looking at the time, and already we've done over 20 minutes here. So if we just move on to like kind of tips for optimization here, and I'm keen to hear your point of view on this, because it's, you know, our job as a payment provider is to listen and sell what you need, provide what you need, rather than sell you what we have. So when you're looking at optimization, well, obviously, if we're looking at new territories and local payment methods, I guess you have to find out what your consumer demand is in those countries, and then also evaluate which is the most frictionless, easy for the consumer, best journey for them, as well as setting it up on your side. What would you put first if you had a payment method that your consumers wanted, but the integration was clunky and the support wasn't great, against one that the consumers didn't like as much, but the service was fantastic? Would you go with what the consumer wanted and make the rest work, or how would you prioritize that?
Pretty much.
I think you have to,
Sadly.
because what's the point if the consumers don't want it?
Right.
Yeah.
It may not be an ideal situation, as you say, but you don't really have much choice in that kind of situation.
And then in that case, unless there's competition with those providers, that someone will give the same customer journey but with a better level of service, you know, it is what it is. You know, we know in the US there was only one show in town for a while there, so there was no competition allowed on the acquiring front, if you like.
You might bring it in, to be fair. I mean, you know, it's not only one thing for one market and one fit. You'd probably bring in the one that the consumers are more comfortable with first, and manage the clunkiness around it. But then that's where working with your other, you know, departments within the company and working with your country managers and your marketing team, and bring in the one that's more suitable to you. Hopefully it's also more cost effective. Usually that's the case. And then work with them to moving customers. So use, kind of going with the cost of acquisitions, use the ugly, you know, because sometimes the cost is also just manpower and effort and energy. Use that one to bring in your clients, but then work with your with that the better company and your internal resources to move some of it over. So you'll never probably have all of that volume going to the one that's better for you, but you'll be able to shift a large amount of it over if you work together with the rest of your teams. So it can be done in a manageable way.
It's never an elegant process, but it's possible.
Yeah. And then how much, when we talk about payment optimization, that term in payments used to really be talking about intelligent routing, which personally was never really a fan of that much, because I think if you optimize something that works in the first place, you shouldn't just be trying to fire things off other ways to try and get to the right result, which is the thing working initially. But now optimization to me means just making sure everything that you have in place is efficient as can be, is configured correctly, is set up in the right way. Everyone understands it from all aspects, i.e. the operator, the technical teams, the consumer. If I asked you that question as what does optimization in payments mean at the minute, how would you kind of sum that up as in a 30-second answer?
Paul?
After you. Okay, I'll go first. I'm going to split it into two. Optimizing a cashier means having the right payment solution available for the right merchant at the right time. Optimizing an individual payment transaction means using data to avoid declines. So if it means changing the journey, if possible, making it easier, making it simpler, bigger buttons, more intelligent decline messages maybe. It's using intelligence. As you say, it started off as dynamic routing, that's evolved into, I'm not going to say AI yet, but it's going in that direction to, you know, an intelligent system that knows how to get a converted transaction from a consumer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that pretty much everything that Paul just said. It's making sure that your customer experience on the cashier is, you know, as elegant and seamless as it can be, but also then in the background making sure that you've used, so a little bit with the routing, because you need to use, you know, data to then help the system learn what to do with transactions to make sure that you get it a successful deposit, really, and a seamless and easy withdrawal. I think one of the things that we forget to talk about a lot is how important good withdrawals are.
Absolutely.
I was watching a panel with one of our friends who couldn't join us today, and he once said that they don't bring in a solution unless you can do a withdrawal.
Yeah, because there's not much point being able to accept consumers' money if you can't give it back to them when they win. Yeah. Or if it's a horrendous journey for them. As much as sometimes I think the priority is always seems to be, let's get the money in, we'll work on getting it out. But it's not, like you say, it's not a case of we'll worry about that later. It has to still exist, and then it's about optimizing it.
I think the risk is higher.
Yeah.
Sorry, just going to say, I think the risk is higher. If a customer has a failed deposit, you lose them and you've lost a customer. If they have an issue with a withdrawal, you know, they're telling their friends, they're on forums. Absolutely. You don't just risk one customer, you risk reputation and further customers.
I agree. And just moving on to the last point then that we were going to discuss here, and I'm interested to hear this point of view from you guys, the role of analytics and data. In other words, when we are optimizing, I'll give you an example, and this wasn't a gambling operator, but they were speaking to me the other day and they said, well, we're interested in adding you, but can you tell us the truth? If we sent to you a failed transaction, would you be okay with that? And my first thing I said to him is, well, why are you sending it to me? Do you understand why it's failed in the first place? And they said, well, I said, well, if you're analyzing the response codes that you get, for instance, insufficient funds, you can send me that all day. It's still going to be insufficient funds. There's no point. Or, you know, if it's a blacklisted card from a certain country, which we want to buy, well, there's no point. So, and there are some unknowns in there, some specific issuers, for whatever reason, might give a different response to a certain acquirer than another one would. But there are very small cases of that. And so what I mean by that is the whole role of analytics, when you can understand why a consumer's declined or a transaction declined, or, you know, if it keeps happening from the same territory at a certain value, what can you try and do to change this or offer them a different payment method or something? In other words, just how big a role do the analytics and data then drive into your decision making as an operator? And the other point of that is, do you rely on your own data more than the providers, or do you mix and match?
I'll take this one on for first response.
Okay.
Most of the data that we rely on is what we get from the providers. So that's the first thing. It's a combination. It's always going to be a combination, but it's also because we do have multiple providers for various markets. So we have to look at it as a whole versus the individual. But one of the biggest challenges we have is getting clear data on why did that transaction get declined? Why was it? Again, insufficient funds, great. You're right. There's nothing I can do about those. Let's move it off. But then there's other ones where it's like, I don't know what code 324 is, and your documentation doesn't tell me. Those are the ones where it's critical that we're able to identify those and solve them as quickly as possible. They're going to be a smaller percentage in most cases, but those are the ones where something has gone wrong, either, you know, between us, between our partners, wherever, and those are the ones that we can fix. And then that allows us the time to be focused on the ones where, okay, this was an insufficient fund. What was the amount? Okay, how can we address this in a different level or whatever? So it is very important to look at those declined messages from the role of from an analysis perspective. But it's also important to do it on recent data. I have people who are like, okay, well, I can pull you everything from last year. And I'm like, last year doesn't help me. Last week, now, today, what was declined today and why? What can we do something about, and how can we work with our partners to fix those? And what is it that we have no control over, so that we can put those and go, okay, we can't fix that. Let's not spend a huge amount of time and effort on the things we can't fix, but acknowledge them so that when given the opportunity, you can actually implement something that will fix it. Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I agree with Isabel completely. Data's critical. You know, a head of payments in an online gaming merchant can't do their job properly without good and accurate data. You know, you've covered most of it there, Isabel, but just going to cards specifically, one of my pet peeves, and I imagine everyone's, is response codes from card issuers just being too vague and generic. You know, you get a decline, you get a do not honor. That's meaningless to me. Tell me, you know, consumers over his limit, tell me insufficient funds, tell me ban merchant, whatever it may be, as long as I know and I can close the case and find an alternative. But yeah, the data we get in from card issuers in particular is regularly not great.
I also think the schemes and the issuers are sometimes vague in the guidelines of what they want you and us to do anyway. You know,
Yes.
so that sometimes doesn't help. And you're right. You know, when you get do not honor, well, okay, great. What do you do with that?
What to do with that exactly?
You know, not too much. But that was interesting because I also and Tom, you know, you guys have been in this as long as I have, so I'm interested to see if you agree with me on this point. I kind of saw a cycle of at one point going through a period where operators wanted to add as many providers as possible and kind of have everything in themselves and run their own teams and know all that data themselves. And then it's kind of gone back a little bit where they do rely and trust, not rely on, but, you know, use the expertise of the payments company more than they used to at one point. And it goes kind of round in cycles like that. Have you guys noticed the same, or am I off the track there?
I think it just goes with the quality of the feedback.
That's probably very true, actually. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think a merchant will want that interaction with every provider. Some providers provide it better than others. You know, we'd love, that's what I said earlier, we'd love to be able to, you know, rely on our payments providers to do a lot of the legwork for us and do something analytics and just give us a summary, not give us a data dump, for example. Some payments providers are good at that, some less so good. That's part of the key service element.
Yeah, the data dump is useful for taking to that next level, but certainly helping us know which direction to even look in is, we rely on our suppliers for that. We rely on those relationships. You guys are, that's what you do. You know, as a company, that is what you do. I am one department within a company that does something else. And so we do completely rely on our providers to give us that granular level of their expert areas. And then we take that knowledge and expand it to work for what we're trying to accomplish. So, but yeah, the data that we get from and the insight we get from our suppliers is what we live off.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I hope anyone listening has found that interesting. I don't want this to last too long. We've probably there's lots of points that we haven't got to yet, actually, because we took more than I thought we would. But again, you know, I want to thank anyone that's taken the time out to be with us this afternoon, and I hope it has been interesting. There's a couple of questions that I'll get to in a second. But again, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy days, because yeah, I'm currently sweltering in my little garden office here because we've normally got the windows open, listening to people cutting the grass and and walking around the place and everything. But windows are all shut, so we can do this panel, which is interesting. And thank you very much. But yeah, thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Paul. I think that was interesting, and I hope it's offered some insight. And if anyone does have any questions for myself, you can certainly contact me at eMerchantPay, and we have the Performance Pulse white paper that's really insightful and got lots of information in there. If anyone finds that interesting, please let us know. There is one question here that says, which is the best payout systems for the EU? Now, I'll certainly come on and ask you to your feedback on this as well. But I would say that's incredibly vague, because really you have to look at what's the best payout system for each country specifically that you're talking about. Obviously, if cards are still king there, then depending on what the territory is, then you have the traditional payout methods via Visa or MasterCard, Visa Direct, or the equivalent coming on MasterCard. And there is, there are bank transfers that can be done, and there's a number of different solutions. But guys, over to you guys. But I would say that's you have to really delve into the country in particular to answer that in more detail.
Yeah, I guess the default would be SEPA bank transfer, but EU's what, 27, soon to be 26 countries. That's going to be 26 different payment options. But SEPA is a safe bet because it does cover everything, and it works, and it's cheap, and it's quick, and it's fine.
It also depends on their deposit methods, the regulations, you can't go, oh, well, we're only going to offer SEPA, but we're going to have all these deposit options that then you kick into some AML regulations that you kind of need to follow, and some fraud. I'm sure your fraud department might have some opinions. So it is really a little bit more of a difficult, as you said, it's more granular an issue than just one blanket answer. But I do agree, for EU, SEPA is kind of the easiest option.
And here's a very good question. It says, Paul Isabel, so how valuable is it for an operator when a provider like eMerchant Pay provides insight to the data that they have as well as the product itself? So I guess we've kind of touched on that, but just the difference between, and how I've always looked at this is what we provide as a business to any of the gambling operators. This is what we do. It's up to you to tell us which bits work. You don't have to take all of it, right? So I guess it's like you mentioned earlier, it depends on the quality of the feedback or the data that someone is giving you. And then it comes down to your own team as well as to which bits you take and use for your benefit, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Chris, I like challenging you and saying, this is the problem I've got, help me find a solution. That will 9 times out of 10 be data driven. If I say I want to know more about this batch of transactions or this sector of transactions, I'll be open and honest with you and tell you what the problem I'm facing is and ask for your help in solving it. And we can both do our investigations. You may have different results to me or more detailed results to me maybe, and then we'll work together to go through it.
It's also the understandability of the data, that like, if you, as Paul said, don't send me a data dump. Let's have a conversation. Let's see how we can make this so that it's easy for me to use. I have 50 plus suppliers. I can't be sitting there with a data dump from everybody and figuring out how that impacts their particular section. I use that for my whole, but for you, I want to have something that's much more granular, much more specific, so that I can focus there.
And I always think on that one, you're absolutely right. Us, and I'm just using us as an example, providing there's your data. Well, just because it's the way we want to give it doesn't do much if it's no good or you can't decipher it and get the bits that you need. It's about listening and understanding and trying to understand what would really help you, and then providing that data in a format that would then give you the benefit. There's lots of questions now. There's one here about keywords were helpful with identifying decline codes, which is, again, I guess, the acquirer has to give you the full response codes, which is the norm now, I believe. I think there still may be some that offer you the shortened versions. But then once you get them, it's about providing it in a digestible manner that you can clearly, see what you need to see and then make decisions from it, right?
It's also about those response codes being relevant.
Yeah, we've got a huge project right now where we're working on all of the response codes we get from the PSPs, and then translating that into something that our internal teams can actually use, because so often it's completely cryptic. And I might know, because I've worked with these things for so many years, what that means, but I don't want every one of those things to get escalated to me. I want to put it in a way internally so that my teams can handle it. I don't want to deal with it. I want to equip them to deal with it. And it's really funny how much work it's ended up being, because they haven't sort of paid attention to the person at the end who's going to be reading this and going, that's what this means. And so I've had a fun couple of months doing that, actually, and learned a lot.
So here's a quick one for you, and I'll fire this straight over to you guys. Matthew has asked, how different are acceptance rates for APMs for a direct integration against the gateway integration? So I'm assuming that means if you went direct to the actual APM provider itself or came through a gateway, do you see a significant difference?
Not normally. It can happen, but usually it signifies an issue or something not right. I think the standard would be they'd be the same. It's certainly possible for the acceptance to be the same. So any time it isn't is a problem.
They've been minor issues, and I don't think it's acceptance. More with I have had issues where the APM accepted certain market, whereas the gateway didn't. And that was an interesting experience, but never where the actual performance in the markets that you're doing support.
You may have extra long latency if you go through a provider. The transaction may take 4 seconds instead of 2 seconds, for example. But that's something that in the real world you can live with. Again, you can look at it.
So I'm just trying to fire through a last couple of quick questions. There's one here that says, if the PSP is not covering a specific geo region, what is the best way to discuss and ask that PSP to help an operator to get payments there? That's usually interesting to startups that are entering emerging markets. My answer to that would be simply speak to your payment provider like us, ask us what we have in the certain territories that you're looking at and you're wanting to go into. You can get that same opinion from me and all of our, my competitors out there, and because you'll then come to a very good, and obviously just do your research outside of the payment companies as well, as to understand what are the local payment methods there. Are they friendly for gambling? Are they not? Okay, which provider has them? And then from there, I mean, I don't think you're going to get to a point where a PSP is going to go into a market and find a solution for you that they didn't have anymore. I think that used to be something that payment operators would say, oh, well, we'll help you. If you've got something, we'll go and integrate it. I don't really think that's as relevant or as realistic anymore. But yeah, my answer to that one would be simply to speak with your payment providers, get a very good understanding of what they can do for you in a certain territory, and then, build up the knowledge that way.
Or shameless plug, contract Paul.
There you go, yes. We have a payment consultant on the panel here.
I can solve that one.
And one says here, which I might ask the guys at IGB here, can you provide your contact information? Well, yes, of course, my email address is chris.smart@emerchantpay.com. I don't know if that gets shared from IGB. If you have any questions for the guys on the panel, I'm happy if the guys are happy after you've spoken to get in touch, that's fine. And then let's see if there are any other. Okay, here's one to end with, and this is not really just payment specific, I guess, and it's one that we can end with here and let you all go about your business. We can all put on our cashmere sweatshirts and relax for the afternoon. What are the main challenges faced today by gambling operators, and how do you see it evolving? That's an open question for you, isn't it? But if you had a minute to say the biggest challenge, let's go payments and non-payments, what would you say they are? Banking. Yeah. And banking has always been, I mean, it's always been the case, right? I mean, certainly when we used to look at, it is, when we used to look at UK operators, it used to be, when we used to support startups when I was at PayPoint, because one of our niches was, we would incubate and support the startups through their initial growth. And then you'd find that the bigger operators, once they had the processing history you touched on earlier, they'd go ahead and then be happy to support your business. But it takes someone to help you launch and go through it. But the last point they always had was the banking relationship, because whilst the major high street banks would be happy to support your high street names that we've all heard of, it was incredibly difficult, wasn't it? And still is. So I guess banking is the answer to that. Yeah, Paul, have you got anything else to add to that, or would you agree?
Oh, well, the other obvious one is regulation.
Yeah, well, yes, regulation is
UK is a prime example. It's different now to what it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's not going in the right direction, in my opinion.
No, and Germany makes it difficult for everybody.
Yeah. Great example.
Operators, payment companies, and for a while, Visa and MasterCard had different views. So yeah. it becomes challenging.
Yeah, definitely.
A good payment system can become a USP for an pedestrian systems would lead to losing customers. So how do you ensure you pick a slick process? Well, I think that's the focus going back there, that the pedestrian and old-fashioned and clunky solutions just don't help. And it's just to do your research on those and understand the product that you're about to integrate and launch in and out before you don't learn on the job, in other words, I guess I would say on that one. Be thorough in the research. Okay, guys, well, that's it from me. And I just want to say thank you again, Isabel, Paul. Thank you very much. And I hope everyone out there has found that very useful and insightful. And on that, we'll hand back over to IGB.
Thanks so much, guys, for a fantastic panel, and equally to the audience for some really fantastic questions today. So with that, we will be finishing today's session. Today's webinar has been recorded and it will be available to listen to on demand shortly for you to rewatch and share with your colleagues. And Chris, we will absolutely try and put your email address in there for the attendees today who wanted to contact you post-session. Isabel, Paul will discuss after, and perhaps put yours in there too if anyone has further questions. Thanks so much for your time today, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.